morning, everybody, and welcome to Bolivia Political Crossroads, episode number 59. Today is Saturday, April 17th, 2021, here in wonderful Santa Cruz, Bolivia. Good morning, Ernesto.
Good morning, Paul.
Everything good?
I'm glad to see you this morning. Oh, yeah, everything is just fine. I'm still hiding, but hiding happily.
As long as you're happy, that's what counts. Happy and healthy. So we've got 4 different topics we can talk about this morning. That we could talk about more if we wanted. There's been plenty going on this week, but narrowing it down, I guess what we can start. We can go in chronological order in terms of when these happened or when they became issues. The segunda vuelta, the runoff elections for the governorships. That's the word, right? Governorships in Chuquisaca, Pando, Tarija, and La Paz. In all 4, they were runoffs between a MAS candidate and an opposition or a non-MAS candidate. And in all 4 cases, the MAS candidate lost. And none of them were even really that close, right? Nothing.
Oh, no.
Where they had to wait until 98% of the votes were in to declare a winner, nothing like that, right? We pretty much knew by the next day or 2 days after, at the worst, who the winners were. And obviously this has a lot of implications for the MAS. I mean, they won out of all 9 departments in 3, Cochabamba, Potosí, and Oruro. I mean, does that sound right to you?
Cochabamba. Well, yeah, that's correct. That is correct.
And so it's they seem to be losing ground and making poor decisions in terms of choosing candidates, which I don't know. I guess looking at it from an outside perspective, it seems it's not a surprise. Well, I think you may be surprised that they lost in La Paz. I think you thought it was going to be closer, from what I recall from your comments.
Yeah, I thought it was going to be closer. I still have, I think, an observation that was made, but it's important to remake it again. Although these were victories from the opposition, we have to clarify who the opposition is. Of the 4 runoffs that took place a week ago, more than a week ago, 3 of them, the opposition is an offspring of the MAS itself, which changes things, right? Because we're speaking like in La Paz. La Paz is probably the best example of this. The question is, is the governor from La Paz a real opposition to the MAS in terms of, technically he is, because that's a whole different political party that's technically speaking about.
Ideologically?
That's the point, yeah. Politically, ideologically, not so much, because we have seen the first thing that happened after the elections, the subnational elections, was that the elected mayor from El Alto did not accept the invitation of the Comité Cívico of Santa Cruz, the Civic Committee of Santa Cruz, because she considered that these were people, their enemies, that these people were the enemies because they insulted her people, the Aymaras, which was true. And I think the reaction of hers is correct, because the president of the Comité Cívico had referred to the Aymaras as bestias, which is beasts, in English. And I think her reaction was correct in those terms. But the message here is that they're antipodes, they're enemies. They're not the same, whether it be the decision of Mrs. Copa, or whether it's the decision of the president of the Comité Cívico of Santa Cruz. It doesn't matter whose decision it is. They're just enemies. because they see each other as different, and they see each other as that. It's some zero game, you know. I win or you win, but we're never going to sit in the same table and arrive to an agreement. And that's definitely politics of the extremists. And here we are watching an opposition party of the MAS that has as its rival the same rival as the MAS has, ideologically speaking, which is the Comité Cívico. So, and that is happening in La Paz. That's also happening in Chuquisaca, because he's an offspring of the MAS. And that happened in Pando. Richter was a Masista. So what we're seeing in Bolivia is that the growth of an opposition that has been born out of the MAS, out of the discontent within the MAS. Basically, it's not an ideological discontent, as you mentioned a while ago. It's basically a discontent of the mistreatment that these people are receiving within the MAS.
I'd say the MAS has strayed from their ideology. You know, they're not practicing what they're preaching. And El Alto and La Paz in general, after 14 years later, they're starting to figure that out. Or 15 years later, right? And it shows. And also, I think something we've talked about before. I suspect Eva Copa had a bit to do with this in terms of influencing the gubernatorial race, because El Mike he was never a strong candidate. He'd run for different.
That's right.
I think he's run for mayor, he's run for governor, and he never takes more than like what, 6% or 7% or something like that. I don't think he'd hit the double digits. And in this election, when they chose Eva Copa as the candidate for La Paz, right? They knew what they were doing in terms of her candidacy. Definitely bolstered the gubernatorial and gave them more of a, I don't know. I think there was definitely some influence there, which is kind of interesting, right?
But you know, yeah, go on.
No, just closing on that. And ideologically, I think again, what we, you know, the MAS not practicing what they preach in terms of being the party that represents the poor and the indigenous and blah blah blah. But at this point, it's just rhetoric that isn't put into practice. There have been tremendous abuses and basically ignoring certain sectors. I've seen that in different articles where there's dirigentes that are saying, oh, you know, in 2007 or 2008, I could call the minister, I could call Evo or whatever and talk to him, and we'd get together and he would sit down with me and we'd talk and he'd listen. And now I can't get through their secretaries, whatever, you know, and they don't give us the time of day. And Eva Copa, I think, is a product of that discontent. And sure. It's especially in the sense that, remember it back in October, November, when these guys all ran away to Argentina, or they hid in the Mexican embassy, you know, all the top ranks of the MAS, she's the one who stayed behind and dio la cara, right? She and so I think she's the representation of that discontent, and also in how she acted at that time shows that she's what's the word? Consistent with, and basically fulfills, you know, the role of going along with that ideology. I guess I don't know if I'm making my point very clear, but
you are. But I think details are very important in the analysis, because many times people don't dig out on these details. And one detail that I've seen that not too many people worked upon is, before the subnational elections, when the Malfu was still alive, the political position of the Malfu was closer to the MAS than to the rest. He argued, or at least he said it, you know, that he was still an indigenous guy. He was representing the indigenous, and that the MAS had gone away from the main discourse, from the main political discourse, but that he was the one who represented. So see, it starts there. It was the Michael that started.
But he was very extreme. I think that's why he never got. He was extremist and can you say a purist in the sense that,
right.
And I think that whereas Eva Copa is
right.
She's more pragmatic. She's younger, so she identifies more with a whole different demographic.
Right. She's a masista, right? That's a difference between the Malco and Eva Copa. Eva Copa is a masista. The masistas are very pragmatic, you know, and they have always been, because Evo Morales is a pragmatist, you know. He's not an ideologue, you know, but he harvests from ideology, but basically he's a pragmatist, and I think that Eva Copa is pretty similar in that sense to Evo Morales. And not to the Malco, you know. The Malco was an extremist, like you say. He was a purist. He was a real indigenous guy that wanted to represent the indigenous exploited people since 1532, when the Spaniards put their foot on Cajamarca in Peru. You know, that's a whole different ballgame. But it's that the ballgame is closer to the MAS than it is to the right, than it is to the Cívico or to Creemos, or even to Comunidad Ciudadana. So my feeling is that those details are showing us that the future of Bolivia, or at least as far as we can see, because it's hard to say the future of Bolivia, it's very hard. But as far as one can see in the midterm, we're going to see an opposition that's basically born out of the MAS. So it's the indigenous versus the indigenous more pragmatists versus the indigenous less pragmatists, the indigenous that are more prone to defend transparency, and versus the indigenous that are more that fall into corruption easily. You know, this happened before in the 70s and the 80s with the MIR, Jaime Paz's MIR. Jaime Paz's MIR was the representation. Well, the MIR was born with a very extremist group, an extremist group from the left. You know, people that were involved with the guerrillas in the late 60s and 70s.
MIR stands for Movimiento Izquierdista Revolucionario, correct?
Right. But these guys, you know, when the 80s came and now the politics of the right wing in the world became more prevalent, because even the USSR collapsed in 1989. In that environment, the MIR became pragmatist. As Evo became pragmatist, so did the MIR. But there was a nuclei within the MIR that never accepted that pragmatism, and they separated from the MIR, and they created a whole new political party, which was they created two political parties out of the MIR. The MIR, the pragmatists, remained with Jaime Paz, and they became associated with ADN, which was Banzer. So the former revolutionaries became associated with a dictator, and the other two branches were not in agreement with that, and they separated. So this is pretty much like that, you know. I see that, but they were still Miristas, you know. They were still Miristas, and they were closer to the MIR than to any other political party outside of that realm. So what I see here is that, yes, the MAS is losing ground, but it's losing ground against the MAS itself, and a MAS in its new version, in a cleaner version, and a more transparent MAS, and a more, I don't know if more democratic MAS, because that's the basis of the whole problem with the MAS. The MAS is not necessarily bad news in terms of ideology, in terms of representing the indigenous people in Bolivia. I don't think they're bad news. I think that's good news. You know, somebody has to represent them, because they have been screwed for what, 500 years, and they're still being screwed in this country. So I think that's a just fight. The problem is, you are going to confront that fight democratically, or you're going to confront that fight with a dictatorship. And these guys are dictators, you know. Definitely, that's the problem with the MAS. And I don't see that the new stemming out from the MAS, this new version of the MAS, are democratic, because I think they're still very, very authoritarian in their ways and means. as are probably most political parties in Bolivia. But this,
well, as we've discussed before, the Áñez administration covered in the same style. But that's the scaffolding or the structure that's been constructed over the past.
Right. Which is not the case of Comunidad Ciudadana and Mesa, you know. People may disagree with Mesa in everything, but I don't think Mesa is authoritarian in itself. He's not compared in his political conduct is not comparable to the MAS, which is authoritarian in its nature, and is not comparable to Áñez or to Banzer or to Creemos, which are very authoritarian. I think there's a segment of Bolivian society or in the political realm that is democratic, that is center, you know, that's like in every country, you know. And I think that is the least represented segment of the political realm today in Bolivia, and the weakest, because if you're a centrist, you're identified with a very weak position, with a wishy-washy position. And they criticize Mesa because he's not authoritarian. And one of the criticisms, oh, he's wishy-washy. He's not from the right. He's not from the left. We don't know what he is. So you're either on the extreme right or on the extreme left. You know?
Even that's an interesting point that you're making. And I don't even think that may be the case for that's been the case for a while now in Bolivia, I think. Although the opposition has never been able to band together to create
that's one of the
alliances.
That's one of the reasons.
But
because the opposition is not homogeneous.
But what I'm getting at here is this is also a tendency in many parts of the world. I mean, in the States. Yep. Things have become so polarized politically. You're either, you know, if you vote Republican, you're a fascist. And if you vote Democrat, you're a communist. And you never used to hear this. You know, you never used to hear this in the States. People speaking like that. At least not from anybody reasonable or rational, right? And now it's a very common discourse, and it happens everywhere, right? Not everywhere, but in many parts of the world. So I mean, the issue is that the center, not just in Bolivia, is underrepresented, but I think it might be losing ground to this.
But you see, what you're saying is so interesting, and it's good to talk about this, because you're the one that recommended that I see The Social Dilemma, and I watched it very carefully, you know. One day I put The Social Dilemma and watched the whole movie. I thought it was a very interesting movie. Not because what it said, because what it says, it's everybody talks about that, you know. But the important thing about that movie is who says it, you know. Who are the ones that say it, you know? And that's so important, because the guys that speak in that movie are the guys that work there, that worked in Facebook, that worked in Instagram, that guy in Twitter, and these were the guys that were really deciding what to do with those social networks in order for the people to become engaged in the networks. And I think that was that's the brilliant part about that. You know, there are many aspects about the movie that I'd love to speak about, but now that we're talking about politics, that movie talks about this issue. I don't recall how they link this, but the conclusion that's in The Social Dilemma, when they asked these guys, is where do you think we're going? And because I don't know if the conclusion was that the social media was feeding people with the discourse, with a very extremist discourse, you know, whether if you're a fascist, then you know, the social media knows that you're a fascist, so they start sending you all the arguments from the fascist, you know. And if you're a quote unquote communist, they'll start feeding you with all this communist lies, you know, lies from one side and to the other. And the argument, the conclusion in that movie was that you don't know the truth, because all you're receiving in the social media is all this food from the right, from the extreme right, that it becomes a true for you, a truism, like they say in English. You know, truism is an unquestionable truth, you know, but hell, it's not proven, it's just truism, you know. So and if you're from the left, likewise, you receive all this information, all of a sudden you become one of those guys, So when they asked them, what do you think is going to happen? More than one of those guys said, what's the solution to this? And more than one said, there's going to be a civil war, because the people have become so ingrained in those positions, and they're not liable to speak because the center is just for the pussycats, so wishy-washy, and nobody wants to be as wishy-washy. They want to be full man, full woman, from the right or from the left. And yeah, that was very worse. And that was, what I don't recall about the movie, and that's the reason I wanted to go back to the movie, and sure. I didn't attempt to do it, is how did the social media got to that point? I understand the mechanism that you start receiving all this information about the extreme right and the extreme left because you are one of them. And of course, the conclusion is that that's your truth, that's your world, and whether you're from the right or the left, I remember that. I remember that the conclusion about this guy's reached a conclusion that there's going to be a civil war. That's the only way out of this. One of those guys, one of the extremes, has to win. Otherwise, there's going to be no peace. And they just don't see how the social media is going to resolve this, because they don't see a resolution through the social media. What I don't recall is how come, because it seems that it all starts with extremists, and the social media starts feeding all these extremists. How did it all begin? How did the American society was already extremist? Because all the social media is just strengthening those positions.
Right.
It didn't change. It didn't change Americans. It just strengthens whether you're from the extreme right or the extreme left, but it didn't change them. They were to begin with extremists, That's something that
it has something to do with what you're exposed to. I mean, I read an interesting book that kind of complements, I guess, this issue called Hate Incorporated, and it talks about the media, basically the mass media's role in this as well. And the media used to be, one of the points it makes in this book is that you used to be able to sit down, talking about the United States, right? And I remember this. You'd sit down and watch your local news, and right after the local news was the evening news, right. And it was very, it was non-controversial. It wasn't, they weren't trying to start an argument or a fight. You watch the news, this is what's happening here, and this is what's happening here.
Exactly.
And this is what's happening in this part of the world, and blah, and that's it. See you tomorrow.
Right.
So there was a conclusion.
Walter Cronkite.
Yeah, Walter Cronkite, Dan Rather, these guys, right? And we'll see you tomorrow. Now, how does the media work now? You look at like CNN. CNN is nonstop. Right. This show ends and the other show begins. It's like YouTube. This video's over and the next one starts right afterwards. Right. And they have, again, I think this show's not on the air anymore, but the show Crossfire, right? You ever watch Crossfire? This guy against this guy. They just fight each other. And so
very good fights. Awesome fights.
Point being is that it's this whole issue of taking sides, and that if you're on the right, you're going to watch Fox, and Fox 24-hour news channel, you're watching it, and just from this point of view or from this bias. And if you're on the left, you're going to watch CNN. In 24 hours, you're getting this exposure to this bias. And so it's not like it happened overnight, right? And it's not just and not all at the same time, but social media has complemented, because social media came along after cable news networks did. And so, I'm not the best authority or person to give a summary on the evolution of this phenomenon, right? Or why this happened and where it came from, but that's why I can tell you, where did this start or where did it happen? I think it happened before social media, in mass media, or basically televised media platforms or channels.
Yeah, but we're trying to discover something that is probably, I don't know. It's always hard to discover the truth, but I think I read I heard an interview a while ago, and I think I commented to you sometime. Vargas Llosa, the Peruvian writer, and I didn't like his writing too much because it wasn't too entertainment to me. But that's aside from the point, you know. He all of a sudden he became like a political theorist, and this is, I don't know what, the latter 20 years, you know, because before that he was just a writer, you know. He was an entertainer, he would write novels, and that was it, you know. But, well, not really, because he was always involved in political opinion. But in the latter 20 years, he's just become a political scientist, you know, and not a bad one, and not a bad one at all, because he read so much, you know. And anybody that reads so much, so many books in the world, man, you become very, very, you have an expertise over the average man by far. So in the interview, he was very good, you know, because the question was about democracy in Latin America. And he said something that I find it brilliant, and I think this addresses the question. You know? He says, come on, you know, he says to the journalist, you know, what are we talking about, democracy, you know? How old is democracy in the world? And when you think about it, you know,
not very old.
The answer was it's stupid, because it's what, 100 years or 200 years old. That's it, you know. It's no longer than that. How old is the world, you know? Well, we don't know, but many thousands of years, you know. So out of those thousands of years, we have what, 200 years of democracy, something like that, you know. And
it's nothing.
And he says, you know, it's so hard to become democratic that, he said, think about it, you know. People still make heroes out of villains. And he said, don't you think that Pinochet was a villain? Sure, he was a villain. But for half of Chileans, he was a hero, because he saved Chile from communism and so on and so forth. And then he said, don't you think that Fidel Castro was a villain? Sure, he killed many people. But man, he was a hero for, I don't know how many Latin Americans and how many Cubans, because he always favored the poor. But both were dictators, you know, and that's how we are still today, you know. And that was very interesting interview, because his political scientist position was brilliant, you know. It's so new, you know. He said it's not popular to be democratic. It's not popular to dialogue between opposing points of view, because all of a sudden you're pointed as a traitor, as somebody that is betraying his original position. So it's hard to be in the middle. It's hard to be in the concertation point, because it's not popular. It's popular to be an extremist in the world, you know. And in many cases, these extremists are not too democratic, which is the case of Trump, you know. And yeah, there's this interesting point, and I think that we have, in Bolivia at least, we are at this moment in this turmoil, in an extremist turmoil. Getting out of this will be very hard, I think, because we're seeing it, you know. We have two extremes here. They don't want to talk about it. Well, Mrs. Coppa was very clear. I'm not going to Santa Cruz to speak with my enemy, because this guy's humiliated my people, the Aymara. So how farthest can we get from each other? I just don't see that coming, you know, very hard. But like you say, and that's a good point, it's not only in Bolivia. You know, look what's happening in Peru. I think the Peruvian question is fantastic at this point, you know, because I don't think Peruvians imagine what's coming, because I somewhat read about Peruvian politics, you know, and now they're confronted in a second round. Who goes to the second round? The indigenous guy from the left and an extremist from the right, who does not have the acquiescence of the right, because many right-wing people in Peru are so harsh in their criticism towards Fujimorismo that it's unbelievable, you know. These people just cannot hear about Fujimori as a man and Fujimori as the daughter, because the daughter participated in the government of her father. She replaced the mother, you know, as the first lady, and she was part of that whole scheme. And then after Fujimori left Peru, went to Japan, she stayed there, and then she became a politician, and then she became involved in profound corruption schemes with Odebrecht from Brazil. And she was found in that stuff. So she has a reputation that's on the floor. Her reputation is as a totalitarian like her father, and as a very corrupt person, because she was involved in the Odebrecht corruption schemes of the latter 15 years. Right. And she was in jail for a while as a result of that. She still has processes. So those are the two options in Peru. And as I said, the right is not happy to vote for her. But if they don't vote for her, that's it. You know, they're going to collapse, and we're going to have another Evo Morales in Peru, because the right couldn't vote for the lady Fujimori. You know,
between a rock and a hard place.
Where are the centrists? The centrists lost the election. One of the center guys there is a very famous economist in the world, not only in Peru. You know, the guy that wrote about the El Nuevo Sendero and all that. Well, this is an economist that I forgot his name right now, but wrote about the informal economy.
No, it's
Hernando de Soto. Hernando de Soto, yeah. He lost badly because people don't like that guy. You know, he writes books. He's a thinker. He's an economist. Now, hell, forget it. You know, it's either her or him, the extremists. And we are boggled by extremists, but that's the reality at this point. And I think that in Bolivia, the second round was the victory of an opposition, but an opposition that is still in the extreme indigenism, I think.
It's it seems like it's just the tendency is for it to become a shouting match, and it's unfortunate. You know, I used to tell my friends, like, it might be oversimplified, but in people, my view on things, like, people say, well, why is Chile such a the shining hope or example or whatever for Latin America? It's, you know, in terms of economic indicators, and so, you know, all the indicators you want to look at to see if a country is going in the right direction or not. You know, they say, oh, Chile within the next 10 years could be considered a first world country, right? Or 20 years, or whatever, however long ago this conversation was. And basically, the argument is, whether you're on the right or the left, in terms of, you know, the balance of power, whatever you want to call it, everybody kind of has an idea. Not everybody, but in general, there's an idea or a social agreement of where the country should be going, you know.
Right.
And in the United States, you've basically seen the same thing. Between the left and the right, they weren't so extreme. And in general, you know, whoever was in power for 4 years or 5 years or whatever the presidential term is, they're kind of going to keep going in the same direction, right? In general. And what you see what you're seeing in the States, and in what you've always seen in a lot of Latin America, is that one guy gets into office for 5 or 6 or 4 years or whatever it is, and takes the country one way, and the other guy the next time the opposition wins and undoes everything the last guy does, and so you're just stuck in this limbo. You're not going one way or the other. You're just kind of stuck, and so and I don't think that's a good thing. You know, I don't think anybody does. But that seems to be the reality. And you know, Bolivia was going one direction for 14 years, and then you know, with these extremes and the polarity, it's I don't think it's good. You know, there is a place for the center, and there's a reason for people to sit down from both sides and have to come to agreements and compromise, and that's how you get things done, and how you progress. And anyway, but sadly, I think on both sides of the spectrum, or on both sides of the, you know, whether it's left or right or however you want to look at it, all they're thinking about is what do they need to do to win, and it's, I don't know, I'm not overly optimistic at this point. It's like you just said, it's going to take years. How do you fix this? You know, Oh, well.
No, terrible. We have to go back to the 70s and 80s in politics because that's it. Oh,
we went off on a bit of a tangent.
I think I lost you.
You did? I'm still here.
Oh,
I'm still
okay.
here.
Yeah, okay. You were static for a while. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Not sure what happened there. I don't know if there's something you want to say in closing, you know, going back to the original theme here with the MAS losing ground and losing these governorships.
I think we've covered this point overwhelmingly.
We had 3 left. The census, the vaccine, and this child abuse case, and we're about 40 minutes in here. So you pick.
Okay, no, I'll pick the vaccine because that's the urgent thing. I think in the short run, that's life and death. You know, that's the reason I pick it, because all the other issues are important, but the vaccine is short-term death or life. So my point on the vaccine is that in Bolivia we are really behind everybody else. This is the whole point, you know, because I understand that in the States things are going slowly because, I don't know, the Johnson & Johnson has appeared with thrombosis, and in Chile they also are having their own problems, and also in Brazil, etc. But in Bolivia, there are no vaccines. You know, all of a sudden they came, I don't know how many thousands, thousands.
25,000.
Yeah, and they started inoculating 80-year-olds in Santa Cruz, you know, and they didn't have enough for the 80-year-olds. By the end of the day, there were many 80-year-olds that didn't get vaccinated because there weren't enough vaccines in Santa Cruz. So the situation in Bolivia is just terrible. Government is flunking with an F, with a big F, and I don't know where we're going because, okay, this is interesting. I think I spoke to you about this like a month ago or a month and a half ago. I received a call from a friend because my friend was related to a big chain, a pharmacy chain in Santa Cruz, and he told me that there was a possibility that this pharmacy was going to bring vaccines from wherever. At the beginning, he said they were going to be in the AstraZeneca, and then he said that maybe it was the Chinese vaccine, which was fine with me because at the absence of
better than nothing.
it's better than nothing. So I gave him the money, and many other people gave him the money. Then the government came out, and like 2 weeks ago, the vice minister of international commerce in the Cancilleria said, forget it, this is not going to happen. Not because the government is against the importation, because we don't care. If you can import, you can import, but there isn't offer. There isn't such thing as the offer.
Not enough supply.
Yeah, there's no supply here, he said, because and if you go and buy in the Chinese market, you're gonna get
careful with scammers.
There's a scheme here.
Yeah.
So he brought examples where this happened, and it seems that it was true. Well, yesterday I received my money back.
Okay, that's good.
They're not going to do it. Yeah, they didn't steal the money, but they gave it back. But the point is, there is no way that the private sector is going to get vaccines in Bolivia, at least in the short run. So we are 100% dependent on what the government does, and the government is not doing it. At least they're not doing it right. Now they're speaking about bringing the Cuban vaccine. The Cuban vaccine has no guarantee whatsoever because it hasn't been tested where it has to be tested, and it doesn't have the approval of authorities, international authorities that have to give their blessing to this vaccine. So I don't know where we stand, but this is just terrible. And like you watched, we mentioned this last week in Spanish. The president said we are going to vaccinate the poor people, not the oligarchs. So this is bad news. I just don't see this coming. But the solution is vaccines. We have to get the vaccines to Bolivia. It's not happening. I don't know what are the obstacles. I'm certain there are, but how come other countries that surround us are getting the vaccine? That's the whole point.
It's a good question. I don't think we're going to know the answer anytime soon. You know, I mean,
does it have to do with the political position of the government? That's my point, I think.
Well, good question. The countries that the highest vaccine rates here in South America are, I believe, Uruguay, Chile, and probably Brazil, I think.
Yeah, so the big numbers. Yeah.
But what Brazil produces their own, right? Under license from one of the.
I think so. I'm not certain. I'm not certain.
Yeah. Uruguay is super small, so I don't know, but that doesn't explain anything about why Paraguay doesn't have it. You know, I don't have an answer. I haven't studied it. I know that our main supplier is supposed to be Russia with the Sputnik, and they're not fulfilling their end of the deal. They're supposed to get.
But that's enough, you know, because we don't know the answer, because it's hard to know the answer. I don't think anybody knows the answer. But there's one thing that's important about the answer, the speculative answer, you know. Politics are not enough here. I think that's a good point, you know, what you just mentioned, you know. If it would be that political alignment with the communists would provide us vaccines, man, I would be a communist, at least for the time being, you know. But it's not, because both the Chinese and the Russians are on the communist side of the world. They are against the United States. Supposedly, the government of Bolivia is a socialist state, and supposedly we are aligned politically. The government, not we. The government is aligned with Russia and with China. We should have all those two vaccines here. And
well, the only ones the only ones we've been getting for the most part have been from Russia and China.
Yeah, but if we are
not as many we're supposed to.
If we are associates, we should have the vaccines here already. But it's not happening. Political alignment is not enough. There are economic considerations for Russians and for Chinese. They're selling their product. They're not giving it away, and they're not giving preference to their associates, to the political associates. You know?
I think we mentioned this last week. At least in the case of Russia, the according to who was the guy locally who spoke about this? If it was this Commerce Vice Minister of Commerce, his name, I think he said that in the case of Russia, they're not fulfilling because the excuse is that in Russia there's a lot of pressure because they're not vaccinating their population, and the Russian people are complaining, you know, why are you sending this vaccine elsewhere when we need it for Russians first? So that's what he said, and so they can't fulfill their own they can't meet their own demand domestically, and so that's why they're not exporting what they were supposed to. You know,
and the Chinese likewise, I would presume, because they're what,
1.2 billion or something. Which I guess makes sense, you know. I don't know. I mean, it's to me, it sounds like a valid excuse, you know. And that's like, if you look at the States with, you know, how are they vaccinating in the States? And sure, they've got to send some of it abroad, but you know, you've got to take care of the domestic supply, or prioritize it at least. You know, it's not saying, oh no, we aren't going to export any vaccines at all until 100% of our vaccines or 100% of our population is vaccinated. They can't do that. Even it would look horrible, you know, on an
international scene,
geopolitically, or whatever the term is. So I suspect that in large part that has some, you know, in the big picture, Bolivia is an easy country to neglect, I suppose.
But that's my point. I understand the point that you first feed your own people. But we are seeing that in Chile, that in Peru, that in the surrounding countries, they're vaccinating their people. That's my point, you know. We are not comparable to them. We are not comparable to the countries that are around us in terms of vaccination. Their campaigns are better. They are vaccinating.
It's a good point. And anything I say would be 100% speculation, and I don't know how close it'd be to being the truth or not. So
my point is that politics is not working. That's my point. Yeah, no. It's not working, because if Chileans are vaccinating their own people better, it's because they're doing the right things. Even though Americans are vaccinating their own people with those vaccines that are Moderna and Pfizer, but Chileans are getting their own share, and they're vaccinating their people. They're not sacrificing U.S. lives, but they're buying whatever they can buy. So are the Brazilians and so are the Peruvians, you know. But in Bolivia, we are partners with the Chinese and we are partners with the Russians. We're not benefiting zilch through them, through that partnership. It doesn't mean anything here. So in terms of health and the vaccination process, political alignment doesn't mean anything. Political alignment means is beneficial for other stuff, but not for the vaccines, which are life and death. And that's pretty bad because the government lives out of political alignment. They live out of ideology. They rest on their relationship with Russia and the Chinese and the Arab countries, but there's nothing backwards, you know. We just support them. They're not supporting us in anything. I think that's
it's a valid claim.
Extreme is my point, but it's it's true, you know. Yeah, that's my whole point, you know. It's I don't know the technical part of it. I just know there are no vaccines, and that we have very good partners on our side of the world, which is the communists, and they're not helping us. Yeah, it's not sufficient to be communists in this world. You have to be a communist with a lot of money.
At least on this issue, it's everyone's basically, you know, fighting for themselves, and I guess understandably so, you know. And I don't want to speculate or say, oh, you know, it's them, the health department or the health ministry's fault or whatever, you know, because I have no idea what's going on behind the scenes and what they're doing, and you know, you also can't foresee. You can't see into the future and say, oh, when we signed this contract, they were supposed to give us these vaccines, and then now they're not fulfilling the contract. You know, nobody can predict the future. It's unfortunate. It's complicated. But yeah, I guess we'll see sooner. Only time will tell, as they say.
Yep. Only time will tell. Okay. Yeah, that's it for the vaccine, I think. Do you want to talk about the census or child abuse?
Let's pick one. I'd say you pick, because
okay,
either one.
I think the census is very important, but we can either one of these topics we can talk next time. But what is really on the news is the child abuse thing, and I think that's very important.
To give anybody who's not up to speed on this background, quick summary. There's a couple, and there's a kid. He's a teenager, right? He's
11 years old.
11, almost a teenager. Who's a stepson to this guy, and this guy beats the crap out of him and turns himself in, and you know, and people question the mother and blah blah blah, but it's receiving a lot of attention. And we talked about this before we started recording. As I said, I'm not downplaying the seriousness or anything, but sadly, Bolivia is one of the worst countries in the world in terms of domestic violence, child abuse, spousal abuse, and it seems strange to me that this case is getting so much attention. And what I told you beforehand is part of the guy's a doctor. He's a physician, and the aggressor in this case, and he also has a very prominent last name here in Santa Cruz. You know, we're still in it might be a city of 2 million people, but people still care about what your last name is here. Anyway, and you don't think so. It's been dominating in the media since Thursday, if I'm not mistaken, even on a national level. You know, so why?
Okay, it's a very complicated issue. That's why I think it's fascinating to talk about this, because it has many aspects of it. One is the last name, but I'm not going to get into that, because not now. I'll get into that in a couple of minutes. I'll start by the main problem, which is the child abuse thing, and child abuse, not women's abuse, child abuse. This is a terrible thing. I know a little bit about it because I worked on this issue for a while, but too many years ago, in the 90s. I used to work in the commission of children of the Chamber of Deputies in La Paz.
Mm-hmm.
And I got into the whole issue, and I remember that it's so complex and so big that it's so hard to start working on that, you know, because children are abandoned in the streets, you know that. Children, I don't know how many thousands of them live on the streets, but thousands in Bolivia. Children are abused in their homes. Children, they have so many problems. When I worked on this issue, and the reason I bring it here is just to show you the difficulty to deal with it, is when I tried to work on it, I tried to work on it in a reasonable, handleable way, something that I could work on. And one of the things that I noticed when I started working on this issue is that there were too many kids in Bolivian jails. And because I was in both commissions. I was in the Human Rights Commission 1 year, and the next year I was in the Child Commission. So as a member of the Human Rights Commission, I used to go to the jails in La Paz, at least. Yeah. And when I went to jails in La Paz, what was really abhorrent to me was the number of kids that were running around the jail.
I've been in the prison here in Santa Cruz, and
they're just like a playground, you know.
It's like a small town. Kids there.
So the whole point there is that when you look at that, you say, "What is this? You know, how are these kids going to grow up? You know, because the guys there are not the good guys; they're the bad guys. You know, and the kids are growing up with the bad guys." Mm-hmm. So I started a whole program, which was benefited by the United Nations. I didn't really get funding, but I got a project running in order to do my stuff there with UNICEF at the time. And as a result of this, I got involved with the people that really knew the issue. I wasn't an expert. I was a politician engaged in the child thing, but the experts were the people that I spoke with. Mm-hmm. And when I talked to these guys that knew about it, they say, "Forget it. You know, you're never gonna reach what you want to reach." My point was get the kids out of jail, which was rational. You know, mm-hmm. Kids are in jail unjustly, and they said, "You're never gonna reach it." And one of the ladies told me, "I hope you don't, because where are the kids going if they're not in jail?" I didn't have an answer to that because she was right. She said, at least in jail, the kids are with a father or with a mother. But if you
or with both, right?
Yeah.
Or am I mistaken? There's like, if you go in Palma Sola, there's women. If I recall, there's women.
The same. Yeah. Uh-huh. They're in different places, but in the same area, territorial area. In La Paz, it's not like that because the women's jail is somewhere else and the men's jail is somewhere else. But the point is the same. She said, "Where are these kids going?" Because in many cases, she told me, both the mother and the father are in jail, and which was true. So she said, it's worse. If you get them out of jail, these kids will go to the streets, or you're going to subject them to go to one of these children's homes, which are highly insecure for the kids. So, man, I didn't have an answer to all this. And in the end, they were right. And if you went to jails in Bolivia and they're still there, well, the kids are still there because they don't have where to put them, right?
Yeah.
It's a very complex issue, the children's issue. And yes, children are abused everywhere. They are beaten, they're raped, they're done whatever, you know. And this is one of those cases. So on the one hand, you're right, it happens a lot. It happens everywhere in all stratas of society, in all regions of Bolivia, the rich, the poor, wherever you touch, it is happening, you know. And worse things happen because children get raped. It's not beaten, raped. I have seen that. They raped, this was in the 90s, they raped kids in children's homes, public homes. The teachers raped the kids. The older kids raped the younger kids. I don't know if it's still going on, but when I was working on that issue, it worked that way. Yeah, they would play soccer And if the losers were raped by the winners. Yeah, turn around and that was it. Yeah, yeah. 16-year-olders were screwed, the 14 or 13-year-olders. Yep. And the teachers would abuse the kids. So that's why my friend told me, what, you're going to get them out of jail and send them there? Yes. So in that perspective, you're right. What we're seeing on TV it's ironic because that's not the worst case. It's one of the many thousands of
I'm not saying it doesn't deserve attention, but I'm saying it's only getting so much attention because
but it's good.
It's
but
in the upper
good.
strata of society.
No, because it's not that's another issue of whether this guy is or the lady is the upper strata of society or not. That's a whole different. That's a sociological discussion. In my opinion, they're not the upper echelon of Santa Cruz society. Not her, not the Antelo part of the family, because and this is, you really have to live here in order to know that and be very well ingrained in this society. In this society, there are Antelos and there are Antelos. Okay, there are Antelos who are the upper echelon, and there are Antelos that are not the upper echelon. Why? Because things happen. One of the reasons, sociologically speaking, is because the main families in Bolivian society, the upper echelons, in different regions, there are different last names, as you know. But those guys, yeah, I'm going to speak about La Paz because it's easier for me, but it's the same in Santa Cruz. You have people that are, for example, from the Villanueva family, which is a very traditional family. But then you have Villanuevas that are all kinds of Villanuevas in La Paz. Because one of those guys, of the traditional families, had extramarital relations outside of marriage many years ago, and they had kids. So many of those kids become recognized, but and they have the last name, but they are never considered of the real Villanuevas, who are the upper echelons. The other ones are the other ones, you know, and that happens a lot. And I think that's what we're speaking about right now. It's not, and it's easy to know that because I know the people in Santa Cruz, and no, she's not of that extraction of the Santa Cruz society. She's just the middle class of Santa Cruz.
Okay.
That's why I don't buy too much the argument. The point here is the people that live in the urbanización, the neighbors, which is very strange thing. The reason for me that's on the news is because the neighbor put it on the news, because the neighbor get fed up with what's happening there, and they had, in their opinion, the only choice they had is to go to the police and present this case to the police. They did it, and they went to the media and they presented to the media. It's important that you mentioned the society. The people who live in that place are not lower echelon. They're educated people. I don't know if they're rich, but they're educated people, like the father was. Yeah? He's a medical guy. Most of the neighbors are educated people.
Stepfather.
Yeah, the stepfather was a medical doctor. So these guys are educated, and they have access to the media, and they have access to the judicial, and they have access to the police. So they could do it, because it's hard in Bolivia to go and be heard by the police, even if you're raped. I don't know if you remember the case of this American woman that was raped some years ago. Samaipata.
Yeah.
She couldn't get the denounce in the police. I met with her, and she told me this whole story on the channel at that time, on the university channel. She told me I couldn't get it. You know, it was impossible to go because they wouldn't believe me. And they argued that, oh, I'm an American, and this woman is probably a devious girl, you know, she was doing something that, yeah, because that's the way they behave, you know. And they didn't believe. She bounced from the police once or twice. She had to go to the Casa de la Mujer, which is an NGO, in order to be heard. The Casa de la Mujer went to the police, and it was on behalf of the Casa de la Mujer that she was heard finally by the authorities. This is an American woman working in the American school in Santa Cruz, and she couldn't be heard. So it's very hard to be heard. So my point in this case is that it's the neighbors that did it, and the neighbors did it out of an altruism, probably so, but it's also because it affects them so closely, you know, because neighborhoods nowadays in Santa Cruz and in most countries, most places in the world, it's not like neighbors before. Your neighbors are part of your life because you live in a close urbanization, and if something like this happens to your neighbors, it's affecting you because you're so close to them, you know. And so the neighbors got together and decided to do it. And the lady didn't represent the kid. The lady is saying that the kid is lying. She said it last night, you know. So the kid has no allies here. Not even the mother is. Only the neighbors are his allies. And that's what's really tremendous about this whole case. It happens all the time. This is true. This is not the worst case of abuse. This is true. But this is a demonstration of how this thing is corroding Bolivian society, and that only a group of neighbors can do it, because mothers are not going to do it, because they depend economically on the money of the father. In this case is the case in point, you know. So she's not going to do it. Police were saying they were looking for the maid because she's going to be a good witness. She's not going to be a good witness. She can't be a good witness. She lives out of the money of the doctor.
Of the doctor.
Sure. So last night she said on the TV that the kid hit himself in the wall. Yes. Yeah. No, this belongs in the media. I don't think this is a government strategy or whatever. It belongs in the media. And yes, there are many cases like this, of course, and there are worse cases, but they can't reach the media. They can't reach the authorities. In this case, they reached the media and they reached the authorities because the neighbors got involved and represented the kid. And that was key to this. Because in other cases, when third parties don't represent the kid, nobody represents the kid. If the mother is not going to defend the kid, who's going to defend the kid?
Wow. That's an aspect I didn't watch this interview. I saw something about it, but I didn't watch it. I didn't know about that. I don't think, you know, I'm not trying to downplay or say it's not a problem or it's not sad. But I don't think it's going to change anything. The way the news cycle is here and
well,
society, the way the system is in general.
Are the kids out of jail?
A week from now.
Are the kids out of jail?
I'd like to look at that point in particular a little closer. I remember maybe 2 years ago or so that they said at such and such day, no more kids in Palma Sola. And I don't know if that ever happened or if it happened and then they crept back in later. I don't know. I'm not gonna.
If they're not up in Palma Sola, I wonder where they are.
Yeah.
Because the system doesn't have a solution for those kids. Still. No. I was involved in that in the 90s, early 90s, 91, probably 92, 1991, 1992. And the lady that told me that was correct. She said, where are you going to put them? And if it happens now, I'm going to ask whoever does it, where are you going to put these kids? The system doesn't have a solution like in the movies. In the movies, they have a solution because they're in Europe or in the States. They take them to a home and that's it, you know, or they look for a foster home, blah, blah. Even the foster homes in Bolivia are dubious because you never know why they're taking the kid. Because people here don't have them.
I don't know if there's that foster. I don't know if the foster parenting program is even a thing here. Because
well, there is such thing.
We've gone through the adoption process, and I don't remember any mention of like, fostering is temporary placement, right?
Right.
Until they find it permanent. And so,
which is different than adoption.
I don't think there's a legal framework here for that.
You're right. No, you're correct. Good point. There is no such.
No. You either adopt or you don't. right? And adoption is permanent until the kid's 18 years old.
Yeah.
So
That's a whole different game.
uh-huh.
But see, this is an interesting thing. We could continue it in the future because it's such a rich. It happens so much that people surrender and they don't speak about it, but somebody has to speak about it, and it's a very important issue in Bolivia.
Well, there's nothing works here. There's going to be domestic violence as long as it's such a complex issue. I mean, first of all, there's no consequences. You know, the guy goes to jail and he'll probably be out, and you know, he's the one with the money, so he'll be out sooner than later.
It's an economic issue. You're right. It's money.
And even if you don't have money, you know, if you're in a family where nobody has money, then you can't even get the police report filed, you know. And so it's and then you talk about societal, you know, where do people learn these behaviors and and it's yeah, I don't see it I don't see things changing anytime soon, unfortunately.
Yeah, not if we keep looking at, because you're right, it has no solution in the short run, but there has to be some efforts, even if they're small efforts, in order to counter that thing, you know. This reminds me a lot of, have you seen that Bolivian woman by the last name of Bolivian that was
Yes.
taken to the White House and stuff? Do you know why she was taken to the White House to speak about?
No idea.
Okay, there's only one reason. I think that was a brilliant reason, you know, because I admire the U.S. in that, you know, because it tends to be a society where things become praised because they're practical, you know, they're looking for solutions. They don't care whether this lady studied in wherever or whatnot. They looked and they said, which institution in the United States remained open, caring for children throughout the pandemic?
Mm-hmm.
The reason is there's one, and it was this institution. I said, call the woman, how did she do it, and why did she do it? So she was summoned to the White House to speak about it, and it was this Bolivian woman. You know, the point of fact is that whether she's Bolivian or not, it's the issue. You know, how did she do it? You know, how did she handle this pandemic, and remain with the doors open with the children and stuff? And I'm sure that in the world, in Europe and the US, in the first world, there are people that could fund projects in Bolivia of this sort. It wouldn't be the first one. I'm sure there are some NGOs working for the children in Bolivia at this point.
Sure.
But we need more of that. And I think that if we get more funds in order to resolve the life of 1, 2, 3, 10, 20 kids, we're doing good. Samuel Doria Medina has an NGO in La Paz. He's a millionaire. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Not for children, for adolescents.
Okay.
But still, the effort is there, you know. So more of that effort we need, definitely. And I think Samuel does a great job on that line of work. It's a good house. He has a house for children of the streets.
Okay.
In La Paz. Yeah.
Good for him.
Yeah.
There's steps you can take. There's things you can do, but the root of the problem is not, you know, preventing the kids from ending up in the streets in the first place, right?
Sure.
And how do you do that? For being abused and yeah, I don't know. That has to come from within, you know. I mean, in terms of major reforms, whether it's in education or I don't know, you know. I wish I had an answer there, and I don't, because the NGOs will help, you know, whether it's one kid or two kids, that's good, but the root of the problem is.
But it's policy. It's what you're saying. There has to be policies, and today policies are not that foreign, because there are policies in Spain. There are policies.
So you say here in Bolivia, you know, Bolivia approves more laws than any other country in the world, but whether they're implemented or enforced or not is an entirely other issue.
because laws walk with money too. You know, it's a money thing.
So they say easier
But,
said than done. It comes down.
But yeah, we have to do something about it. It just, we can't just surrender vis-a-vis the problem. So, but yeah, it's good that we spoke about it. That's my take on this child abuse thing. It's basically the neighbors that did it. You know, if it wouldn't be for the neighbors, it wouldn't be on the news. It wouldn't be on the police. Nobody would have heard this. The kid would still be abused by the stepfather.
Yeah, well,
And the
we'll
mother
see.
would still side.
And we'll see where it goes. Yeah, you know, again, I'm not optimistic when they go and what you told me troubles me. You know, that the doctor, the aggressor is the one with the money, and basically, you know, the threatening the mother and the maid and everybody else. If you don't testify in my favor, then no more money. That complicated. All right, always good. It's always good to end on a good note, Ernesto.
At least a thinking issue. We have to think about it. And it's good that people think about it too. Well, that's the third world, and that's Bolivia, and that's issues are very heavy. We are here to resolve them. Human beings. He who has some capability to do something about it, welcome to do it. Whatever you can do it, you know. Yeah, you've done enough in life, so you don't have to worry about that. I think that's the whole issue. You know, everybody has to put a grain of effort into this whole thing. Well, yep.
That's it.
Enjoy.
Have a good weekend. You too. And everybody else, have a good weekend.
Bye-bye.
Bye.